In November 1944, with Allied armies racing across France faster than anyone thought possible, President Franklin D. Roosevelt made a remarkable admission. He said, "Without these cans, it would have been impossible for our armies to cut across France at a lightning pace which exceeded the German blitzkrieg of 1940. He wasn't talking about tanks. He wasn't talking about planes or artillery or the bravery of American soldiers. He was talking about a gas can, a German gas can, one that American military planners had been shown 5 years earlier and ignored. This is the story of the German equipment that was so well designed, so practical, and so superior to what we had, that America had no choice but to copy it. Some of these items you've probably used yourself or seen your father or grandfather carry home from the war. And you may not have known that every single one of them started out with a German name. Let's start with something simple, something every infantryman carried, something that could mean the difference between life and death when the shells started falling: the entrenching tool. Now, American soldiers in the early years of the war carried a shovel that wasn't much different from what their fathers had carried in the trenches of France in 1918. It was a solid piece of equipment, a fixed blade, a wooden handle, and it got the job done. But it had one major problem. It didn't fold. That meant every GI had this awkward, full-length shovel banging against his leg as he marched, catching on brush, getting in the way when he needed to move fast. When you're trying to hit the dirt with bullets flying overhead, the last thing you want is to wrestle with your own equipment. The Germans, meanwhile, had solved this problem back in 1938. They called it the Klappspaten, the folding spade. It was elegant in its simplicity. The blade folded against the handle, making the whole thing compact, enough to carry on your belt without trouble. But here's the clever part. The blade could lock into 3 different positions: fully extended for digging, at a 90-degree angle for chopping through roots or hacking at frozen ground, and folded flat for carrying. A simple locking mechanism, a bakelite knob that any soldier could operate with cold fingers in the dark, held it all together. When American forces first encountered these German shovels in North Africa and Italy, they knew immediately that they were holding something superior. Word filtered back through the ranks. Reports were written. And by 1943, American factories were producing our own version. We called it the M1943 entrenching tool. It was, for all practical purposes, a direct copy of the German Klappspaten. The Army didn't advertise this fact. There were no press releases about how we'd borrowed the enemy's shovel design. But the men who carried both knew the truth. And that M1943 design? It became the foundation for every folding entrenching tool the American military has issued ever since. The next time you see one of those folding shovels at a camping store or an Army surplus shop, you're looking at German engineering from 1938, adopted by necessity, carried by generations of American soldiers, and still going strong more than 80 years later. But a shovel, however well designed, is a small thing. The next item America copied from Germany would help decide the outcome of entire battles. In the summer of 1942, American ordnance officers introduced a weapon that would become legendary: the M1 bazooka. It was a simple concept, a tube that launched a rocket-propelled grenade capable of punching through tank armor. For the first time, a single infantryman could take on a panzer and win. The bazooka gave American soldiers a fighting chance against German armor, and it quickly proved its worth in the fighting across North Africa. But the Germans were paying attention. In late 1942, during the Tunisian campaign, German forces captured several bazookas intact. And with typical German efficiency, those captured weapons were immediately shipped back to the fatherland for study. What happened next was remarkable. German engineers didn't just study the bazooka, they improved it. They kept the same basic concept, a shoulder-fired tube launching a rocket-propelled shaped charge. But they made it bigger, much bigger. The American bazooka fired a 2.36-inch rocket. The German version fired an 88-millimeter round, that's nearly 3.5 inches. They called it the Raketenpanzerbuchse, but the troops just called it the Panzerschreck, the tank terror. The larger warhead meant it could penetrate thicker armor at longer ranges. It could kill tanks that the original bazooka would have only annoyed. German soldiers on the Eastern Front used it to devastating effect against Soviet armor, and when American tankers encountered it in Normandy and beyond, they learned to respect it. Now here's where the story gets interesting. American forces captured Panzerschrecks, just as the Germans had captured bazookas. And our engineers did exactly what the Germans had done. They studied the enemy's improvements and incorporated them into our own design. The original bazooka had a significant weakness. It used batteries to ignite the rocket, and anyone who's ever had a flashlight die at the wrong moment knows how unreliable batteries can be. In the mud and cold and chaos of combat, those batteries failed constantly. The Panzerschreck used a magneto, a simple mechanical device that generated its own electrical charge when you pulled the trigger. No batteries required. It worked every time. So when American engineers designed the improved M9 bazooka in 1944, they borrowed that magneto system directly from the captured Panzerschrecks. They also made the launcher break down into 2 pieces for easier carrying, improved the sights, and added a better blast shield. But that firing mechanism, the heart of the weapon's reliability, came straight from German engineering. Think about that for a moment. America invented the bazooka. Germany copied it and made it better. Then America copied Germany's improvements and made it better still. It was an arms race conducted through imitation, each side building on the other's innovations. And the American soldiers who carried the M9 into battle in 1944 and 1945 were carrying a weapon that was part American ingenuity, part German engineering. War has a way of stripping away pride and prejudice. When something works, soldiers don't care where it came from. They just want it in their hands. And that brings us to a weapon that would shape American military doctrine for decades to come. If you served in Vietnam, or knew someone who did, you know the M60 machine gun. It was everywhere. Door gunners hung out of Hueys with M60s blazing. Infantry squads humped them through the jungle. Navy swift boats mounted them on their decks. For an entire generation of American servicemen, the M60 was the sound of American firepower. What most people don't know is that the M60 was born from German DNA. During World War II, American soldiers learned to fear a sound unlike anything else on the battlefield. The German MG-42 machine gun fired so fast, 1,200 rounds per minute, that individual shots blurred together into a continuous ripping sound. The GIs called it Hitler's buzzsaw. The MG-42 wasn't just fast, it was versatile. The Germans had pioneered what they called the universal machine gun concept. One weapon that could serve as a light machine gun carried by advancing infantry or be mounted on a tripod for sustained defensive fire or fitted to vehicles and aircraft. One gun, many roles. American doctrine at the time used different weapons for different jobs. The Browning automatic rifle for squad support, the air-cooled Browning .30 caliber for medium work, the water-cooled Browning for heavy sustained fire. It was complicated and logistically demanding. The German approach was simpler and more elegant. American ordnance officers took notice. During the war, they actually attempted to directly copy the MG-42, producing a prototype called the T-24. but there were problems converting the design to American ammunition, and the project was abandoned. The idea, however, never went away. After the war ended, with thousands of captured German weapons available for study, American engineers went back to the drawing board. They didn't just copy one German gun, they combined the best features of two. From the MG-42, they took the belt feed mechanism, that smooth, reliable system that fed ammunition into the gun without jamming. From a lesser-known German weapon called the FG-42, a remarkable rifle designed for paratroopers, they took the operating system, the bolt, the gas system, the way the whole action cycled. They married these German elements to American manufacturing and American specifications, and in 1957, the result entered service as the M60. The gun that would become synonymous with American military power from Vietnam through Desert Storm was, at its core, a hybrid of German engineering. This wasn't shameful. It was smart. The Germans had been at war longer than anyone. They'd had more time to refine their weapons, to learn from combat experience, to innovate out of desperation. When the fighting stopped, the victors had every reason to study what the vanquished had created. The M60 served for nearly 40 years as America's primary general-purpose machine gun. Millions of Americans carried it, trained with it, fought with it. Many of them never knew they were holding a weapon whose grandparents were German. But all of these items, the shovel, the rocket launcher, the machine gun, they're tools of war. The next thing America copied from Germany wasn't a weapon at all. It was so simple, so ordinary, that most people wouldn't give it a second glance. And yet, without it, the liberation of Europe might have stalled in its tracks. Let me take you back to the North African desert, 1942. The British Eighth Army is fighting Rommel's Afrika Korps in a brutal back-and-forth campaign across hundreds of miles of sand. Tanks, trucks, and aircraft all run on gasoline, and in the desert, fuel is life itself. The British are using standard-issue fuel containers, rectangular 4-gallon cans made of thin sheet metal with soldered seams. The troops call them flimsies, and the name tells you everything you need to know. The seams split. The corners leak. When stacked for transport, the cans crush each other. The screw caps require a wrench to open and a funnel to pour. In the brutal desert heat, the thin metal expands and contracts, and the solder gives way. By some estimates, the British were losing 30% of their fuel before it ever reached the tanks that needed it. 30% gone to leaks and spills and evaporation. Meanwhile, Rommel's panzers never seemed to run dry. British soldiers noticed something. Every time they captured a German position, they found fuel cans that were utterly different from their own, sturdy, compact, brilliantly designed. The Germans called it the Wehrmacht Einheitskanister, the Armed Forces Standard Canister. We know it today as the jerry can. It was a masterpiece of practical engineering. Instead of thin sheet metal and soldered seams, the German can was made from 2 pieces of heavy-gauge steel, stamped and welded together with a single seam around the middle. It couldn't leak because there were almost no seams to fail. Instead of a troublesome screw cap, it had a cam lever closure that any soldier could open and close with one hand without tools. A built-in spout meant no funnel was needed. The sides featured distinctive X-shaped indentations that served multiple purposes. They strengthened the can, and they allowed the contents to expand and contract with temperature changes without bulging or bursting. Most ingeniously, the can had 3 handles on top. A center handle for carrying 1 can, Two outer handles that allowed a soldier to carry two cans, one in each hand, and the spacing was designed so that when passing cans hand to hand in a human chain, one man could grab the far handle while the next man grabbed the near one, making rapid refueling possible. The Germans had thought of everything. Even the interior was lined with a special coating that allowed the same can to be used for either fuel or water just by changing the color of the exterior paint. When British forces captured German supplies, they hoarded those jerry cans like treasure. Officers would trade for them. Units would fight over them. The jerry can became more valuable than the fuel inside it. Here is where the American part of the story begins, and it's a story of bureaucratic blindness that cost lives. In 1939, before the war even started, an American engineer named Paul Pleiss was working in Germany. He was building a custom vehicle for an overland journey to India, and he needed containers for emergency water. A German colleague, whose name has been lost to history, had access to a military depot at Berlin's Tempelhof Airport. He quietly took 3 of the new Wehrmacht fuel cans for Pleiss's expedition. He also gave Pleiss the complete manufacturing specifications. Think about that. Before the first shot of World War II was fired, an American had the blueprints for Germany's secret fuel container. Pleiss made it to Calcutta. He shipped his vehicle and the jerry cans back to the United States. He contacted the War Department and showed them what he had. They weren't interested. The Army told Pleiss they already had a fuel container. It was the same design they'd used in World War I, a 10-gallon can with 2 screw closures that required a wrench and a funnel. It worked fine, they said. Pleiss tried again. He was ignored again. Meanwhile, the British were losing 1/3 of their fuel to leaky flimsies in North Africa. It wasn't until 1942, after we'd entered the war and reports from the front couldn't be ignored any longer, that the Army finally agreed to copy the German design. The 1 jerry can in American possession was sent to Camp Holabird in Maryland for reverse engineering. But even then, they got it wrong. The American copy retained the shape and the handles, but the engineers changed the welded seam to a rolled seam, which leaked. They removed the plastic interior lining. They kept requiring a wrench and funnel for the cap. The American jerry can was better than the old flimsies, but it wasn't as good as the German original. Still, it was good enough. Production ramped up. By May 1945, American forces in Europe had used over 19 million jerry cans. And President Roosevelt was right. Without reliable fuel transport, the breakneck Allied advance across France, faster than the German blitzkrieg of 1940, would have been impossible. A simple steel can, designed by German engineers, manufactured by American factories, carried by Allied soldiers across a continent. The jerry can didn't fire a shot. It never made headlines. No medals were awarded for its design. But ask any veteran of the European campaign, and they'll tell you, you can have all the tanks and planes and guns in the world, but if you can't get fuel to them, you've got nothing but expensive junk. There's a lesson in all of this. The United States in World War II had the greatest industrial capacity the world had ever seen. We could build more planes, more tanks, more ships than anyone else. Our factories ran day and night, and the arsenal of democracy buried the Axis powers under a mountain of steel and explosives. But building more doesn't always mean building better. The Germans, fighting with fewer resources against enemies on all sides, had to innovate to survive. They had to squeeze every ounce of efficiency from every piece of equipment. They couldn't afford waste. They couldn't afford failure. And so they designed a shovel that folded, a fuel can that didn't leak, a machine gun that could do the job of 3. Solutions born from necessity, refined through years of hard experience. When American soldiers encountered these designs, they did what practical men have always done. They took what worked. That's not shameful. That's smart. The greatest generation didn't win the war through pride. They won it through adaptability, through determination, and through the simple wisdom of recognizing a good idea when they saw one, even if that idea came from the enemy. The folding shovel your grandson takes camping is German. The jerry can in your garage is German. The machine gun that defined a generation of American warfare was German at its core. And the nation that copied these designs went on to put a man on the moon using rockets built by German engineers we'd recruited after the war. We took what worked. We made it our own. And we won. That's the American way. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden engineering behind World War II, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories history textbooks leave out.